Good morning once again for those of you that just joined. All right, so we've been looking at IAS 16 property, plant and equipment. And we've gone through a lot. Yesterday we dealt with components, and we finished the aspect on components, and we looked at major inspections. And then I asked you to read up on depreciation or changes in depreciation methods. And that's what we're going to look at today. You already understand what depreciation is from having done accounting in the first year. I will just turn the camera off just for the bandwidth. Okay. All right. So let me share the slides. Okay, I believe you can all see the slides. This is the third set of slides on property, plant, and equipment. And what are the learning outcomes for this unit? You should be able to subsequently account for PPE under the cost model, all right, which is basically cost minus accumulated depreciation minus accumulated impairment losses. But in this specific lesson, we're going to look at depreciation. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to define depreciation, and you'll also be able to account for changes in the depreciation method using the cumulative catch-up method and the reallocation method. Those are the two methods we're going to look at today. So let us look at, first of all, depreciation. What do you understand by depreciation? What is meant by depreciation? Not the accounting definition, as you can see on the slides, but a layman's definition of depreciation. Can anyone give me the layman's definition of depreciation? You can unmute your mic if you want to speak, or you can just raise your hand and then I can just pick you out. What is the layman's definition of depreciation? Hemin, can you help us? Hemin? Hemin, can you help me with the layman's definition of depreciation? Okay, Hemin is not there. So there's an answer in the chat. Emma Abraham says it's a decrease in the value of an asset. The decrease in the value of an asset. The same answer, Shemiso gives the same answer in the chat. The reduction in the value of an asset. Penahafo also gives a reply, losing value. Depreciation is when property is losing value during the useful lifetime. All right, and Tina says the loss of the value of a non-current asset over a period of time. Okay, so that would be the layman's definition. So if you think about it practically, let us say you were to buy a car. As soon as you buy a brand new car and you drive it off the parking lot, you won't be able to sell it for the same amount that you've just bought it for. It has already depreciated in value. All right. In accounting, we will define depreciation as the systematic allocation of the depreciable amount of an asset over its useful life. So the depreciable amount is the value over which depreciation is calculated. We'll look at that. So what is the point of depreciation? Over an asset's useful life, the economics benefits that are associated with that asset are used up, and thus a portion of the cost price of each item of PPE must be recognized as an expense, and that expense is known as depreciation. All right. So economic benefits of an asset are used up over time. So in order to, you can look at it like matching, the matching principle in order to match the expenses with the revenues in the period that they are incurred, we have to account for an expense that relates to the economic benefits that are being lost from an asset. Because an asset has depreciable assets have finite useful lives. They cannot be used indefinitely. Okay, so if you have a car, for instance, a delivery vehicle, maybe your useful life will be maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. All right, you will not be able to use that asset indefinitely. So we have to allocate an amount each year to show that each year there's going to be decreased economic benefits that we will derive from that vehicle. The useful life of an asset is determined at acquisition of the asset. All right, so on acquisition date, you determine the useful life of that asset based on information that is available on that date. However, if you look at land, land is a non-depreciable asset. It is deemed to have an indefinite useful life. Okay, so if you look at the borders of Namibia, we assume that the land in Namibia belongs to the Namibian people. It will always be there. All right, it might change hands, but land will not depreciate. It will always be there and can be used indefinitely. So remember I told you that depreciation is the systematic allocation of the depreciable amount of an asset over its useful life. Okay. Sorry, some people are speaking in the background. Please pay attention. Okay. So I said depreciation is the systematic allocation of the depreciable amount of an asset over its useful life. So what is the depreciable amount? The depreciable amount is the value of an asset that is going to be recouped through use. All right, you're going to recover it through use. And then, so the portion that is recovered through use is the portion on which depreciation will be calculated. However, there's an amount called the residual value, which is not going to be recovered through using the asset, but it will be recovered through the sale of an asset. All right. So it's the amount, the residual value is the amount that is expected to be obtained at the end of the useful life of an asset. All right, by selling or disposing the asset. Maybe you scrap the asset. So for example, you see the pie chart in front of you. Okay, we have an amount in the dark orange or red. The bigger portion of that pie chart is said to be the depreciable amount, and the smaller portion that is recouped through sale is said to be the residual value. So for example, if this were an item of PPE, let us say the whole value, the value of this item of property, plant and equipment is 500,000. If we expect 480,000 to be recouped through using the asset, and we expect at the end of the useful life to sell the asset for 20,000. The 20,000 will be the residual value, while the 480,000 would be the depreciable amount. And the depreciable amount is the amount on which depreciation is calculated. You can define it as the cost minus the residual value. The cost of an asset minus its residual value gives you the depreciation the depreciable amount. Okay, so if we look at depreciation, depreciation represents the economic benefits derived from the use of an asset. So if the asset had a value of 500,000 and we say it has a residual value of 20,000, we're expecting the 480,000 to be those are the benefits that are expected to be derived from using the asset. And then accumulated depreciation are the economic benefits derived from using the asset from the date of acquisition of the PPE item or from the date the item of PPE was brought into use up to the end of the current period that you're in. So if you've been using the asset for 4 years, the accumulated depreciation would be the depreciation for year 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, the depreciation for the current year is only the depreciation that is related to that specific accounting period, which is a period of 12 months. Are there any questions? All right, I think this is straightforward. So how do you choose a depreciation method? A depreciation method is chosen based on the expected pattern through which economic benefits will be derived. You look at an asset and you look at the expected pattern from which economic benefits will be derived in order to choose a depreciation method. For each category of PPE, an appropriate depreciation method should be chosen. And that choice between that the entity makes between alternatives is known as the accounting policy. So for example, you might have vehicles, you might have machinery, you might have buildings. For each category of PPE, you choose an appropriate depreciation policy. So for example, you might decide for vehicles to use the reducing balance method. And you choose the reducing balance method because you assume that you're going to gain more economic benefits in the earlier years than in the later years. For buildings, you might choose the straight line method, all right, because you expect to gain benefits from those buildings evenly. So you expect the depreciation on those buildings to be the same. So you'll probably choose the straight line method. For machinery, the policy might be to use the production units method. So based on the number of units that is produced by that machine. So that accounting policy should be chosen at acquisition of the asset. It's based on the information that is at hand or on hand on the date of acquisition. Okay. The most common depreciation methods that we have, the straight line method, the diminishing balance method, which is also known as the reducing balance method, and also another method is the production units method. Okay, so for assets such as vehicles, planes, you might use flight hours as a depreciation method. All right, that is similar to production of units method, but instead of basing it on units produced, you're basing it on the number of hours that the plane has flown. It may happen that the estimate that was made at the inception, at acquisition of the asset, changes. And when this happens, we have to change the estimate for depreciation. So you may have a change in the useful life of an asset. You may have a change in the residual value, and that you may also have a change in the depreciation method. So as I previously stated, the useful life and the residual value is estimated at the time the depreciable asset is acquired using facts available at that point in time, and thereafter you choose a depreciation method. However, a change in useful life or residual value and depreciation method may be necessary at a later stage if it appears that the information that was used to determine the useful life or the residual value and the depreciation method was incorrect, or if there is new information available. So remember, we say accounting is based on estimates. However, these estimates may not be entirely accurate. So in future, if it becomes apparent that the policy, the depreciation method, or the useful life that was chosen was incorrect, you're allowed to change the depreciation method. You're allowed to change the useful life or residual value. A change in the estimate of useful life or residual value and in the depreciation method is not an error. Okay, it is dealt with in the standard accounting standard IAS 8, changes in accounting policies, changes in accounting estimates and errors. That's the standard that deals with changes in estimates, IAS 8. For the purpose of this course, we are not going to deal with IAS 8. However, we are going to show you in the examples that we're going to do in this class, I am going to show you how you would actually calculate amounts that relate to a change in useful life. All right, but we are not going to discuss the note that would have to be presented in terms of IAS 8. So a review of the useful life, residual value, as well as the depreciation method should be done annually. So annually, when financial statements are prepared, you should also review the useful life, residual value, and the depreciation method. A change in the useful life, residual value, and depreciation method is dealt with prospectively, not retrospectively. So it's dealt with going forward, all right? By changing the depreciation for the current year and also for future years. All right. So you don't restate financial statements of previous years or prior years. You are going to account for the change in useful life or residual value depreciation method prospectively in the current year and future years. And the two methods that used to account for a change in estimate, you can either use the cumulative catch-up method or you can use the reallocation method. Those are the two methods that you may use to account for the change in estimate. So the first method that we're going to look at is the cumulative catch-up method. In the cumulative catch-up method, you should calculate the accumulated depreciation to the end of the current method, to the end of the current period using the new estimate. And then you subtract the accumulated depreciation at the beginning of the current period. The difference is the depreciation for the current period. Okay, I guess this will be understood better by looking at an example. So the key thing in the cumulative catch-up method is the word cumulative. What do you understand by using the word cumulative? What do you understand? What do you think needs to be done? Justina Mbula, can you help us? What do you think needs to be done? When you hear the word cumulative? Or how would you define the word cumulative? You can write in the chat those that that do not have a mic and maybe cannot speak. I was waiting for Justina Mbula to help me. Okay, there's an answer in the chat. Let me look at the answer. Okay, Georgina says it means collective. Sanjay says that it means increasing. Okay, anything else? Anyone want to add on to that? So if you look at cumulative, you look at the total amount, So let's say in year one, let us say you're collecting apples. So on day one, let us say you collect 10 apples. On day two, you collect 5 apples. How many apples do you have in total on day two? So the cumulative total on day two will be 15 apples, for instance, all right? So it's the total value. You add day one and day two's totals to get the cumulative amount. So, yes, Penahafo says it's increasing in quantity by successive addition. Exactly. Okay. So if we're looking at the cumulative catch-up method, we have to add, right, both years' depreciation, right? And then we add depreciation for year one and for year two, but we will calculate the total depreciation at the end of year two and subtract the depreciation at the end of year one in order to actually find out what the depreciation is for year two. So let us deal with an example to illustrate this concept. So this example one requires us to use the cumulative catch-up method. This example is also from Gripping Up. I just didn't note down which page it is in the book, but it's in Gripping Up. Look at the portion that talks about changes in accounting estimates as it relates to changing the useful life residual value of the depreciation method. So look at that part in the chapter. It's a very small part. So let me read the scenario. An entity purchased a plant for 150,000 on 1st of January 20X1 and intended to depreciate it using the production units method. The estimated residual value is nil, and that has not changed. So since acquisition, it has just always been nil. Production in the year ended 31 December 20X1 was 10,000 units, and in 20X2 it was 15,000 units. It was originally expected that the asset would be able to produce 100,000 units in its lifetime. So the original estimate of the total useful life was 100,000 units. But in 20X2, this estimate total production was changed to 90,000 units. All right. You're required to calculate the depreciation and carrying amount for 20X2 by adjusting the carrying amount for the cumulative effect on depreciation date. So how do we know that we're supposed to use the cumulative catch-up method? It is stated in the question. Calculate the depreciation and carrying amount by adjusting the carrying amount for the cumulative effect on depreciation to date. All right. So you see the word cumulative effect? That means you should use the cumulative catch-up method. Okay. So I'll give you 3 minutes to calculate depreciation for 20X1 only. The depreciation for 20X1 as well as the carrying amount for 20X1. All of you should be doing this. I'll give you 3 minutes. It's 8:58 now, so I'll give you until 9:01 to do that, and then I expect someone to give me an answer. To give me the depreciation for 20X1 only and the carrying amount at 31 December 20X1. Someone is asking me to go back to the question. Can't you see the question? Example 1. Pinahafo. It is on the screen. The whole question asks you to calculate the depreciation and the carrying amount for 20x2, but I have asked you just to give me the depreciation and carrying amount at 31 December 20x1. This is what is projected on your screen is the question. In 1 more minute to come up with the depreciation and the carrying amount at 31 December 20x1. $901 now. I believe that should have been enough time for you to calculate depreciation and the carrying amount up to 31 December 20x1. So can anyone give me an answer? Those that cannot speak out, maybe you don't have a mic, you can type it in the chat. What is it? Let us start with the depreciation for 20x1 and how you'd calculate it. Depreciation for 20x1. Guyana, Amalwa, can you help me? What's the depreciation for 20x1? What's the depreciation for 20x1? Alfiku, can you help me with the depreciation for 20x1? You can unmute your mic if you want to answer. Okay, I have an answer from I know. It says the carrying amount is 89,991 and the depreciation is $9. Am I reading that correctly? I know, Ashikutu. Do you agree with Aino's answer? Aino's typed in the chat 89,991. That's the carrying amount and depreciation of $9. Do you have a different answer? Taina Amoku says that depreciation is 12,500 and that was obtained by saying 150,000 divided by 12. What is the carrying amount? Alpha Dube gives me an amount of 15,000. I don't know whether the 15,000 is the carrying amount or whether that 15,000 is the depreciation. You need to mention, you need to specify in your chat. If you're going to say it in the chat, please specify, is the 15,000 depreciation or is the 15,000 the carrying amount? Alpha Dube. Okay. So Alpha Dube says that the depreciation in 20x1 is 15,000. All right. So let us go through this. Alfiku says depreciation is 15. That's 150,000 divided by 10,000. Okay, so you've swapped the calculation around. Okay, so let us go through this. I will share share Microsoft Excel page. And show you how we'd go about the calculation. So the production units method is actually quite straightforward. The way we would calculate depreciation is to look at the production, what was produced in the current year, as opposed to, and look at it as a percentage of the total production, right? So in the current year, the question tells us that the units produced was 10,000. So 10,000 units were produced, and the total expected production units produced, let me just put the date there, 20x1, that was 10,000 units. And the total production, let me call it the total expected production. The total expected production was 100,000 units. So if you look at the number of units produced in relation to the total expected production, it comes to 10%. And you'd get that by saying 10,000 divided by your 100,000, that gives you 10%. So 10,000 divided by 100,000. So this 10%, we must account for depreciation, 10% worth of depreciation, all right? So we're going to take our cost, which is 150,000, and multiply it by the percentage or the fraction there. And what you'll arrive at is an amount of 15,000. All right. So 10,000 units divided by the total number of units, multiply that by the cost, you get the depreciation for the year is 15,000. Let me actually do it this year. Let me write, it's the cost times the units produced in the current year divided by the total expected production. Okay, which is the cost was 150,000. You multiply that by the 10,000 units produced, divided by the total expected number of units produced, 100,000. You're going to arrive at an amount of 15,000, and that is your depreciation. 31 December 20x1. Okay, now the carrying amount, we know the carrying amount is equal to your cost minus accumulated depreciation. And so your cost was 150,000 minus your accumulated depreciation. We only had depreciation for 1 year, so our carrying amount is therefore 135,000. That is carrying amount at 31 December 20x1. Are there any questions?
Can you please repeat the how you got the depreciation for 20x1, the 135,000, sir?
135,000 is the carrying amount. And that 135,000 is the cost minus the accumulated depreciation. The cost we're given, the cost was 150,000, and then the depreciation, we only had depreciation for 1 year. That depreciation for that year was 15,000. So the 150,000 minus the 15,000 gives us a carrying amount of 135,000. Is that fine?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, now let us, so we haven't even answered the question because the question asked us, so we have answered the question that I asked you, which was to calculate the depreciation and carrying amount at 31 December 20x1. But the question didn't ask that. The question asked you to calculate the depreciation and the carrying amount at 31 December 20x2. All right. I'll give you 2 minutes to give me the depreciation and the carrying amount at 31 December 20x2. Now that we've been able to calculate for 20x1. Let me go back to the theory, first of all, just to show you what it says. Let me share the slide. Anyway, the slides are on Teams and on Excel if you're not looking at my slide. So using the cumulative catch-up method, you need to calculate the accumulated depreciation to the end of the current period using the new estimate. And then you need to subtract the accumulated depreciation at the beginning of the current period. So we've already calculated the depreciation for the beginning of the current period, the accumulated depreciation, which is 15,000. So the first step, calculate the depreciation to the end of the current period, which is 31 December 20x2, subtract it from what you've already calculated in order to get the depreciation for 20x2. All right, that's how you do the cumulative catch-up. So I'm putting the question back there. 1 more minute. Okay. And we have the depreciation for 20x2 and the accumulated depreciation. And the carrying amount at 31 December 20x2.
Sir, I got an accumulated depreciation of 25,500 and a carrying amount of 109,500 because I rounded off the 1.66 to 1.7.
Okay, so you said you have depreciation for the year of 25,000?
500.
25,500. And then your carrying amount was?
109,500.
109,500. Okay, that's one answer. Anyone else has another answer? Someone else with another answer? Okay, let me share my Excel. Okay. Okay, so this one I've already done the calculation just to save time. So depreciation in 20x2, now we have to use the cumulative catch-up method. So first of all, we look at the cumulative total units. The cumulative total units would be 10,000 units were produced in 20x1 plus 15,000 units were produced in 20x2. So the cumulative total number of units produced would be 25,000 units. All right. So that's the cumulative total units. Then you have to take, you have to look at the total expected production. And in this instance, the total expected production changed. It's changed from 100,000 and in 20x2 it was now 90,000. All right, so it reduced. So the total expected production, so we're saying the machine has less capacity. So what you need to do in order to calculate the depreciation for the year or the accumulated depreciation would therefore equal the cost multiplied by the cumulative total units, and then that is divided by the total expected units. So that total expected units would be the new estimate. Let me just go there. So if we were to put it, the cost was 150,000 multiplied by the cumulative total units divided by the total expected units, which is the new estimate, then would arrive at an amount of 41,667. So that would have been the total accumulated depreciation at 31 December 20x2. That would have been the total accumulated depreciation. But then what would be the depreciation for 20x2? Therefore, the depreciation for 20x2, this is what you do. You take the 41,667, subtract the depreciation that we calculated for 20x1, and therefore the depreciation for 20x2 is 26,667. So you do not calculate the depreciation directly like we did when we did when we calculated the depreciation for 20x1. We have to calculate the cumulative total accumulated depreciation. All right, so we have to calculate the accumulated depreciation as of 31 December 20x2, subtract the depreciation for 20x1 in order to arrive at the depreciation for 20x2. Are we together?
No, sir.
Okay, where have I lost you?
F the depreciation for 20x2, sir.
Okay, so again, remember when I asked you what is the definition of cumulative? Let me go back to the chat. There was a good definition that was provided in the chat that said increasing in quantity by successive addition. All right. Okay. Or the collective value. Oh, okay. So if you're looking at the cumulative total, cumulative catch-up method of calculating depreciation, that means we have to find out what is the cumulative total of depreciation. And what is the cumulative total of depreciation? The cumulative total of depreciation is just the total accumulated depreciation, right? And the theory tells us in order to estimate or get the value of depreciation for using the cumulative catch-up method, you would first have to calculate the cumulative total, or you would have to calculate the accumulated depreciation at the end of the current period and subtract any depreciation that was there previously in order to achieve to get to the depreciation for 20x, in order to get to the depreciation for that year. So in order to calculate the cumulative accumulated depreciation or the total accumulated depreciation, we have to find out what is the total number of units that were produced first of all. And the total number of units produced, I highlight that in yellow, were 25,000. We produced 10,000 units in 20x1 and 15,000 units were produced in 20x2. Are we together up to there? Hello, are we together up to there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the total number of units produced were 25,000. Now we use the same formula that we used previously, whereby we take the cost, we start with the original cost, multiplied by the units produced divided by the total expected production. So we use this, the formula, I'll highlight the formula in orange. We use that same formula, okay? So the original cost price was 150,000. Now, since we're using the cumulative catch-up method, we need to take the cumulative units produced, and the cumulative units produced were 25,000 units, okay? And the total expected production now changed in 20x2. Instead of being 100,000 units, the cumulative total production was now 90,000 units. So using that formula, the cost multiplied by the cumulative total units produced, which was 25,000, divided by the total expected production, which is 90,000. That is the new estimate. We arrive at an amount of 41,667. So you can call that the cumulative accumulated depreciation or the cumulative depreciation. So cumulative depreciation would just be accumulated depreciation, which amounts to 41,667. So that is depreciation for year 1 and year 2 combined. Is that okay? The 41,667 is the depreciation, the accumulated depreciation for for year 1 and year 2 combined. Are we okay up to there?
Yes, sir.
But now we want to find out what is the depreciation alone for 20x2. So if we're saying 41,667 is the combined total depreciation, and we know that in 20x1 we had depreciation of 15,000, the difference between the 41,667 and the 15,000 would then give us the 26,667, which would be the depreciation for year 2 or 20x2. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if we have the depreciation for 20x2, we can now calculate the carrying amount at 31 December 20x2. We already had the carrying amount at 31 December 20x1 was 135,000. We subtract the depreciation for the current year, which is 26,667, and we arrive at an amount of 108,333. That is the depreciation for that was the carrying amount for 31 December 20x2 using the cumulative catch-up method. Are we okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm going to post the solution on Teams. What I want you to do, I wanted to finish the slides today, but the time has run out. So the next method that is there is the reallocation method. So I'll post the solution for the I'll post the solution as well for the reallocation method. So I want you to go through it on your own, and tomorrow we'll just discuss it. All right. So that you use the same information, but instead of using the cumulative catch-up method, you're going to use the reallocation method. All right. So the theory tells you how to you will calculate depreciation using the reallocation method. Okay, so just do the examples, and then tomorrow, after we go through the reallocation method, we will then go through the rest. We'll look at land, and would also look at the derecognition of property, plant, and equipment. Is that okay? I think that should be fine.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So I will see you tomorrow. I will post the solutions immediately after the class so that you can go through them. Okay, so see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye.